Hello, and welcome to Speaking of Supply Chain, where we explore trends, current events, and innovations impacting the logistics and supply chain industries. I'm your host, Ellen Wood. I am joined today by Anastasiia Omelchuck. I pronounced that wrong. I'm sure I did.
Right. Perfect.
You're joining us today to talk about the Due Diligence Act that has just come into law in Germany and is affecting a lot of companies in the German area. And so we're going to talk about that in a few minutes and what that means in terms of the upcoming legislation next year for the entire EU. All right. So before we get to our topic today, which I'm really looking forward to, before we get to that, let's take a moment and talk to each other. So you have an interesting job on your CV history that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I don't think that I have it on all of my CVs. However, I used it in the beginning of my career to draw a bit attention to myself.
Okay.
I used to work as a model.
Okay.
For 5 or 6 years. So I'm from Ukraine and worked mostly in Kiev, and then I also briefly worked in Milan.
Mm-hmm.
So during Milan Fashion Week. So this is something unusual that you would see for a supply chain consultant, I would say.
That is a bit unusual. I mean, it's not bad. If you've got the talent, then you should make full use of it. But so did you model for an agency? Did you model for a specific fashion brand? What kind of modeling did you do?
So I did have an agency. And I did it as a part-time job, so to say, during my studies to get some extra money. Mm-hmm. And I did a lot of catwalk shows. I didn't do that much shootings, but being on the runway was basically my favorite things. It was really exciting. I really enjoyed it the whole time. I knew always that it wouldn't be my career in the end. And I don't think I was that good, but I was good enough to get quite a few very interesting jobs. And as I said, catwalk was like my favorite thing for a long time, and I really miss it right now sometimes.
Well, and yeah, you get to travel and you get to see everything that's new in the fashion industry. So yeah. That's really exciting. That's much more exciting than some of my CV history. The most interesting thing on mine, I'm sure our listeners have heard it before if they're part of our listener group that gets this additional content, and that is that I managed a restaurant. And yeah, I was a restaurant manager for years, and that's where a lot of my experience, because I'm not from the supply chain industry. Mm-hmm. So my experience is as an end user. So receiving inventory and dealing with warehouses and production schedules. I mean, it's on a micro level for a single restaurant. But yeah, I ran a restaurant for 7 years, and then I decided I did not want to do that anymore. The hours are so long. And one of my colleagues, when she promoted up to become the restaurant manager from the assistant manager, everyone asked her, is it different? And she said, no, it's the same work. The only difference is now when something goes wrong, it's my fault. So, and I can relate to that. When you're the manager, it's your responsibility to make sure everything is running smoothly. And if it doesn't, the buck stops there. That's where the complaints go. And so I loved working in the restaurant industry. I miss it all the time, but it is very stressful, and I don't miss that.
Yeah, I understand. I totally get you, because I used to work as a waitress for a year, I think. And I think that job gave me the most of skill of stress coping that I've ever had in any other job in my life. Because on the one hand, it's really fun because you have a great team and you're all in this together. On the other hand, as you said, the hours are so long and you're not that lucky with your customers sometimes. And it's so much stress that you have to tackle daily, and you're not allowed to show that you're stressed. I think that's the worst part. Almost like you can't walk around with a mean face. You have to smile.
So as a restaurant manager, I got to avoid some of that because I could go back in my office and be stressed out. But I also waited tables after I was a restaurant manager. So I thought I knew what I was doing. No, waiting tables is very hard, very, very hard. And I did not enjoy that either. So, so here I am instead in marketing, which I like much more. And even as crazy as the supply chain industry is, the stress here is much more tolerable than anywhere else. I
agree. I agree. So that's really good. We're both here now.
Yes. All right. So on to our topic today, which is the Due Diligence Act, which is at the moment only concerning Germany, but a lot of those regulations are going to be coming into play for other countries in the EU. So Germany's kind of our beta test. It's our test example to see what's going on. So tell us a little bit more about the study and the law itself.
Yeah, definitely. Germany is a great test run, so to say, for the European Union, especially that we know that the European legislation is planned to be even stricter than the German one.
Yikes.
So even though we have already some resistance in Germany, and it doesn't seem as easy as it sounds, we know that when the European legislation comes, it's going to be even more difficult for business to comply with it. So what we did in our study, we basically decided to ask our customers who are partially those large companies that are directly fall under the law and partially smaller companies. We wanted to ask them, are they prepared for the legislation? How do they see it? What are they expecting? And so on. And we definitely got sometimes very surprising results, not exactly what we expected. So it was very interesting.
All right. So what are some of the aspects of the legislation that are like the big pieces, the more important aspects or the more important regulations that the companies are afraid of or worried about? I mean, obviously, something has to change. So there are issues of sustainability. There's issues of human rights and, other areas of governance and civil issues that companies need to make sure that they're adhering to. What are some of the big ones?
Yeah, so when we talk about sustainability, I think I would start there. A lot of times, especially in Europe, the first keyword that people would come up with is like CO2 and the environmental sustainability.
And their emissions, yeah.
and the emissions. However, it's like a small, important, but small part of sustainability, right? So we don't have to forget that the legislation is kind of based on the fact that there are three pillars of sustainability: the social, environmental, and economic one. And there is the greatest difference with the German legislation and the European one, that German one only focuses on the social sustainability. So as you said, it's child labor, human rights, working conditions, fair pay, and so on and so on. So this is the main focus of the German legislation, and there are a few clauses that touch environmental problems, but they're rather side effects, so to say.
Okay.
Whereas the European legislation tries to tackle the environmental problem directly, and they have a clause for large companies to report about how they are planning to reduce their CO2 emissions to zero by 2050, according to the Paris Agreements. So these are the two main differences. However, the base of both legislation is the same. It's asking companies to implement a risk management system to tackle those social and environmental problems. So this includes the risk management system itself, having responsible persons, conducting regular risk analysis, implementing procedures for whistleblowers, and so on. So having that system in company in place.
So a lot of what companies are concerned about or in fear of is the fact that this risk management preparation for lack of a better word, just being prepared for it is going to require extra effort. It's an effort has a cost. It's going to require extra personnel or extra time or extra software or something that they're going to have to do that they're not doing today. So what are some of the feedback that you got from the survey itself? Or even further, how was this survey conducted? Like, did you just go out and start asking people? Was it an online survey? How did you gather all of this data?
There was an online survey, so we targeted our clients, but we also had it open on LinkedIn and our other social networks, so anyone could fill it out. And we had more than 300 responses, I think, overall. So it was really good, and I think more than 80% completed it till the end.
Oh, in its entirety. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. So that was we had great response, and we had a lot of data to work with, which was really good. And yes, indeed, we had a few questions in the beginning of the questionnaire, like what are your expectations towards the legislation? Do you think it will have positive or negative impact? What do you think will be your biggest challenge? And indeed, most of respondents told us that they think that the biggest challenge will be bureaucracy and the additional costs and effort that's related to it, which is understandable. On the other hand, what we have noticed is during the interviews and during the questionnaire that not everyone realized completely what the legislation is about, and they had certain expectations, like, you talk, it's sustainability legislation, and then without thinking about it more in detail, they thought, it means immediately CO2, or it means immediately I have to quit all of my suppliers in China, or I don't know. So they didn't realize. In some cases, we noticed that not everyone understood completely what the law means, and of course, this not having a clear picture can lead to the fact that there are fears regarding the additional cost or administration, even though we have seen a few studies that actually said that the cost for the companies will not be as high as many expect, and there is nothing to fear about it. And the other thing is is that the legislation requires you to implement risk management system, and it's a good thing. It's something that we encourage our clients to do.
Exactly. I know we've talked on the podcast on other episodes about risk management and how companies are trying to prepare for that, because most companies do want to head off risks before they're hit with a surprise or another pandemic or another, container ship caught in a canal. They want to be able to adapt to what's happening that they have no control over. And this is something where they do have some control over what's going on. And I feel like a lot of companies were as you said, automatically going to the worst case scenario, automatically thinking of the most interruption or the highest interruption that could possibly happen, and a worst case scenario. They were just afraid of it and didn't actually understand what was being asked of them at that moment. Yes, we do want to get to a point where, people are not using child labor, or people cannot get a job that earns, a living wage. We do want that for everyone. But it's not from zero all the way to that answer. It's how do we stair step and get there one little bit at a time?
Yeah, exactly. And I think this is an important point, because I think when seeing some of the resistance that we saw in the questionnaire and during the interviews, it feels like some companies do not realize this is only the first step. So the only way forward for us to tackle all those environmental and general sustainability problems that we've got, we have to make that legislation more and more strict, and we have to go farther and farther, right? So if you look at the general problem of the social inequality or climate change, this legislation is kind of the drop in an ocean.
Yes.
So it's only the beginning, and I think the companies, I don't want to say to have to put up with it because maybe it's negative, but they have to change their awareness and change their perspective here, because there should be more legislation like that, and this is the first step to it. So right now they're asked to implement risk management system, but we know, for example, that in the European Union there are already discussions about having much more strict environmental legislations, for example, in the fashion industry, controlling what kind of fabric is used in the garment. Is it polyester? Is it cotton? Which fabrics can you combine so that they are more recyclable and so on? So this is a lot stricter already than just implementing risk management systems. So this is great that we've got this legislation now, and it is a very important step, but there is more to come, and companies will have to deal with it.
Well, and it seemed to me that a lot of it was not just that they needed to implement, but they need to understand where they are today. So a lot of these metrics that they're being asked to measure or reduce or report on are things that they had never considered previously, or not considered of importance that they needed to track. Whereas this particular legislation brings to light that no, this is an important fact. This is an important issue that we need to track and understand what your impact is as a company, as a producer, or as even just a company who moves items from point A to point B, that you have an impact on that overall issue. And you need to understand what that is, so that if there is a call or if there is a need for you to reduce your impact, you know where you stand.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. And it's really pushing business to look into these topics. For example, a lot of talks in Germany before the regulation has come into force were like, oh, business is doing so much already. We are already so aware of sustainability. We don't need extra administrational effort to do it. But then when we did our study, we saw that the companies that have recently implemented the sustainability strategy, for them, the main factor to do so was actually regulation. And I think it was like about 44% of companies that just recently implemented sustainability initiatives or strategy did it because of the regulation. So it's almost half. So we need the regulation to push companies to do it, even though it seems like everyone is doing it already. Not really. We need governments to promote it.
To step in and have some oversight so that we can establish what the overall situation is across multiple companies. Because a company can say, well, yeah, I'm sustainable. I'm taking care of these issues internally. We do have ways to track and mitigate these concerns, but not every company does. And for each company to say, I moved the needle this far, or I've saved, this much in my carbon emissions, those add up for every company that is participating or working in that, that environment. So we need to make sure that there is some sort of oversight into what is happening as a whole, as a full industry. And speaking of industries, are certain industries more concerned about this than others? You mentioned the fashion industry, and I know I've read articles about, some of the fashion brands and some of the sustainability issues that they're facing, especially when they want to protect their brand and not let, items go unsold, so they're destroyed. And this is a huge sustainability issue. So are some industries more concerned than others?
Yeah, definitely. In fact, the European Sustainability Due Diligence Act even recognizes certain industries as high impact or high risk industries. For example, fashion, agriculture, minerals, and so on, where definitely the situation is different in different industries. For example, if we talk about fashion, it's notorious because of the volume of the product that is produced and sold annually, of the volume of waste. Because of the way the products are produced, there's so much need for toxical chemicals that are being released into environment because of the social issues, right? So there's it covers all of the sustainability topics when we talk about fashion. And so, of course, for those companies, it will be more difficult. Also because the fashion supply chains are usually really large, really long, if I can say it so, because each step of the production can be done by a different company. That maybe you as a brand don't even know all of your final suppliers and everyone who participated in producing your product. One of the worst products to produce is denim, right? So you've got company that produces cotton, that sources cotton. Then you've got someone who is processing the cotton into fabrics, then someone who is dyeing it, then someone who is making it into fabric, then someone who is actually, sewing the products themselves, and then only like 10 companies later it comes to the customer. So this is difficult part for those industries with very long supply chains too.
Well, and convoluted supply chains, because you mentioned denim, but that's only one part of a pair of jeans. You've also got the zipper. You've also got the little leather tag on the back, or you've got the little snaps or something else, the decorative appliques and all the things that can go into that pair of jeans that someone's going to purchase at a store. And so all this intricate web of all of the supplies coming together that's going to affect the way, the fashion brand that is being affected has to look at all of those inputs that are coming into their supply chain.
Exactly. So for such a company, it's a lot more of a challenge than, let's say, you are a local producer of tomato sauce and you locally source all of your tomatoes, salt, and sugar. You source packaging from the same suppliers you've been working with for the past 20 years. You own your production, produce everything, distribute yourself. You've got your own distribution network. Then you can track it a lot better than a company as like we described the fashion industry. And there are also industries that have been always highly regulated. For example, pharma.
Yes.
Like pharma supply chains can be also quite long, and there are also a lot of outsourced production. But because they have always been so regulated, they already have a lot more connection to their suppliers. And for them, that extra administrational effort does not seem that much of a challenge.
It's such a small lift to take the data that you already have, that you've already been collecting over all this time, and give it over or produce a report to show what you're doing, as opposed to having to start from scratch and all of a sudden look at these things that you've never looked at before.
Yes, exactly.
All right. So what about companies that are not large enough? So one of the aspects of this legislation is that it's mainly looking at companies of a certain size. So smaller companies have smaller regulations or less compliance issues to be concerned with. So what about those smaller companies? Are we just discounting them? Are they coming later? What does that look like?
Definitely both German and European government is looking into how to incorporate smaller business into legislation too, without having too much pressure on them. However, in our study, we have noticed already that small companies that do not directly fall under the law, they are preparing themselves just as much as the large companies. So they're also developing an action plan. They also worry. They have the same challenges facing them, which was very surprising because really there was almost no difference in the replies for large and small companies in our study. And the interesting thing is that small companies right now who also have their expectations and a bit concerns about the legislation, they are worried that large companies will be pushing the responsibility upstream, especially if we're talking about a small supplier whose only customer or 90% of orders is done by a large company that have a lot of market power, and that large company could tell them, yeah, I need from you the audits, the certificates, whatsoever I need, and that this responsibility will be pushed farther, so to say, and that all those small companies will have to do the work.
So they would bear the brunt of all of the effort that needs to be done. Yeah. So in our example a few minutes ago where we were talking about jeans, when the jeans company says, I need to have all of this data about the zippers that we use for these jeans, and there's one zipper company that's providing the zippers, and all they do is supply this one fashion brand. So now they're going to be expected to come up with all of that data because the larger company needs it.
Yeah. So this is definitely the worry that the small companies have. However, we know that the legislation does not require us just to provide a certificate about your suppliers. We know you have to have risk management system in place. Mm-hmm. So already by that, we know that most of the work to implement this management system and to take care of it, to run those risk analysis and so on, most of the work will be actually taking place in the big companies. They can't outsource. They can't outsource. They can't ask someone else to run their risk management for them. So that's already good. However, when it comes to those audits and proof of sustainability, performance, and so on, we will have to see how that develops and how that works, and how much work the smaller companies will have to do. And I think that's good that we have this German legislation now as you said in the beginning, a test run for the European legislation. So we don't know yet how that will impact the smaller companies, but what we know already that they are just as worried, and they are preparing themselves just as much and doing basically the same work. The only difference that we saw that smaller companies don't tend that much to seek consultancy services when it comes to this legislation. But otherwise, they're doing all the same.
Exactly. It's not something they've thought of. They're a small enough company that they typically don't have to, pull in or outsource that expertise. They're able to just handle that in-house. So the larger companies that are more familiar with the concept of hiring a consultant to come in and assist with this type of thing, they're preparing in that way. So does that mean that smaller companies will look for more outsourced assistance when it comes to that? Or are they overly concerned with their typical budget and thinking, hiring a consultant to come in is going to be outside of our scope or outside of our available options?
I think the reason here is really more what they are hiring consultancy for. So a lot, or the biggest part of consultancy is hired for legal purposes. So when you directly have to comply with the law and when you have to fill out all those official forms, that's what you need your legal consultant for.
Yes,
so this is something that the smaller companies won't need. On the second place was actually supply chain consultancy as the most sought advice. And I also think that this is also more of a problem or a challenge for larger companies that have those very large supply chains. And this is a question if the smaller companies will need that. So I think they would rather tend to go in for consultancy, for sustainability consultancy or standardization of processes. This is something that they might need in order to provide the evidence of their sustainability performance. But I think they will try to tackle different kind of problems, the large and the small companies, with the consultants that they hire.
Sure. So were there any specific comments from some of the participants in the study that led you to some of these conclusions? Did anyone say something specifically like, I'm worried about this? Because I know you did interviews, so it was speaking directly with these individuals and not them just filling out a survey online. What were some of the more personal responses that were concerning or excited about? Is anyone excited about this legislation? Yeah. Is anyone looking forward to it?
Yeah, I think this is the part that I would like to talk about, because when we did the study, it seemed like overwhelming amount of businesses or participants are worried about the cost. But in our interviews, we talked to quite a few large companies that already identify themselves as sustainable companies, that they have had the sustainability strategy implemented for years. And the representatives of those companies were actually really excited about the upcoming legislation, or now it's already
in force, yes.
in force. But they actually were very optimistic about it. First of all, they've been working on those topics, and they've had those risk management system and sustainability strategy for years. So they are not that concerned about what that might mean for their business, and they have been paying the cost of
Exactly.
for being sustainable already. And another point is that for them now the playing field will become more fair, because one of the companies that we had an interview with was kind of surprised for me that they were so sustainable, because it wasn't their selling point. They weren't marketing themselves that, oh, we're really, really sustainable. They have very high quality product, but they don't talk about it that much, about how sustainable they actually are. So they have been paying the cost for many years just to be sustainable. Mm-hmm. And now other companies, their competitors, have to do that too, and they have an advantage. So those who have been sustainable already, for them it's a good thing. And I also think we also had an interview where we heard that it's great that it's coming in Germany. For us, it's now a challenge. But when the European legislation starts, which is a lot stricter, we already know how to deal with it. We just have to adjust it a bit, and we already know what to do about it. So it's also an advantage for German companies, because they have to start it a bit earlier, and they will be fit for the European law a lot better.
Exactly. As you said earlier, it's a step. It's a step in a process. And you've got, so these companies who have already worked to enact some of these policies and prepare, or just be sustainable because it's the right thing to do. So they haven't been getting the notoriety from it, maybe, or maybe they have, who knows, but they're already ready for this. So it's to have it be a legislation or something that they have to report on or fill out a government form. That's just a little bit of headache, a little bit of bureaucracy that they have to do, but all of the actual work in changing something has already been done. So now they're leveling the playing field where their competitors have to do the same thing, and we've already got it done. This isn't hard for us now. And then next year, so the EU legislation is supposed to take effect in 2024.
We don't know exactly yet, because how it works in the EU, that each individual country gets 2 years to adjust the legislation to their own country, and then it must be approved by the European government, and only then it comes into force. So it might take a few years still until it's actually
in place. Okay.
In place, yeah.
But we know it's coming. We know it's only a matter of time. And at some point, these countries are going to have to participate. So all of this is building up, and Germany's going to be well-placed, well-positioned to move on to that next step, because for them, it is only a next step. And hopefully other countries are going to be doing something similar, where they're preparing and making it so that it's not all at once, that it can be a transition period of moving up into these levels of participation in making sure that their supply chains are more sustainable. So, what are some of the other implications of that legislation? We know it's going to take years to, enact, that everyone's going to have a say in what that final legislation is going to entail. But what are some differences between that one and the German Due Diligence Act that is in effect now, other than scale? Are there additional issues that it's going to tackle? Are there additional and again, if it's still being ratified, if other countries are still weighing in on what the importance is, that may change. But at the moment, what is different between the two pieces of legislation, other than just the scale of the impact?
I think two other important differences are, first of all, that in the European legislation, the let's call them the CEOs or directors, have personal responsibility
Okay.
towards the performance, the sustainable performance of the company, or towards the implementing of the due diligence strategy. So in Germany, you only the company as an institution, right? So or as a body
Yes,
is
exactly. Is responsible.
responsible. But in European Union, it can be so that for the large companies, the person, the one at the head of the company, is responsible for the implementation of the law, which is a great difference, because if you're personally responsible for something, there is a lot higher chance that you will make sure that that's in place and it's working.
Especially at that level when these people have a very high stake in their companies. So it's important to hold them personally responsible for the company's participation and what's the word I'm looking for not just their participation, but their success in establishing some of these policies and making sure that they do extend to the entire company. And it's not just, pencil whipping a form and filling it out and saying, yeah, whatever. This doesn't affect me personally, so I don't care. I might change jobs next year, so it's not going to matter. And putting that back into their lap and saying, no, this affects you now.
Exactly. Yeah. That's why I think it's a big difference, and it's really important to bring personal responsibility into the sustainability matters, to give them more pressure for it. And another important difference is actually the responsibility, or what happens if you don't comply with the law.
Okay.
Whereas in Germany, there is no criminal responsibility for it, but there might be a possibility of financial penalties, but I don't think it's happening right now. Whereas in European Union, there is a criminal responsibility for not complying with the legislation, or at least it's planned so right now, or proposed so right now. And there is a possibility of an import ban to European Union if you do not comply. So the level of responsibility is a lot higher when we're talking about the European legislation.
So what would be a worst case scenario? So if a company just does not comply, they do not participate in either the German legislation or in a couple of years with the EU legislation, what is a worst case scenario? What could a company expect to happen to them if they decide to blow this off and ignore it and not do anything?
To be honest, I am not sure what the correct answer would be for the German Supply Chain Act if you just keep getting notices from the government that that's wrong. So I don't know how far that can go in Germany, but in European Union, you just will have to stop your business there. You will not be allowed to practice any kind of business in the European Union anymore.
That would be significant for a lot of global companies to not have that very, very large demographic area to have your business participating in. Excuse me. So what do we look for in the remainder of this year in terms of what Germany is trying to do, what Germany is trying to push its businesses to get ready for in terms of this larger scale legislation? What can businesses expect for the next 6 to 9, 12 months?
Well, for Germany, the next 12 months will be significant because right now, this year, the legislation applies to the companies with more than 3,000 employees. However, starting with 2024, it will apply to companies with more than 1,000 employees. So a lot more companies will be in scope. And those companies should be learning right now from those larger firms, and hopefully already starting their preparation and already putting the risk management system in place and doing all the work, because it cannot be done in December. They won't manage.
Exactly. Take note, medium companies, you are on deck next. It'll be your turn and you need to be ready for it. All right. So where can our listeners get a copy of this information? Is the study available right now? You said that it's finished, so no longer taking participants in it. But where can they get a copy of this?
On our Miebach website.
Okay.
They can, it's for free. They can request it on our Miebach website and they will get it.
Okay, wonderful. Now, what if someone has specific questions about it? Are you the contact person for them to reach out to and ask? Is there someone else who participated in this study? What groups were participating?
Yes, definitely. I'm very happy to answer any questions. I'm always there. And also my colleague, Thomas Krebs, who conducted the study together with me, would also be the right person to contact. So I think two of us, would be the right people to answer any of your questions.
All right. We should probably warn Thomas that we just put him on notice that he's going to be answering questions about this. Okay, wonderful. Well, any other last remarks about this important and very, very groundbreaking piece of legislation that's going to lead the way into what the EU is trying to accomplish in terms of the Paris Accords and all these other things that we're trying to do to make our world a better place and a better place to do business. Any other last thoughts?
Yeah, I think we at Miebach generally, we think this is a great step towards more sustainable business practice and generally being more sustainable as a society. And I hope that we see a lot of resistance, so it means it's doing something. There is progress. And I hope that we will change our awareness so that the sustainability regulation will be a normal thing. It won't be any more groundbreaking to implement new legislation because of sustainability. That will be in place always because this is something that we need. And I hope that, the next steps are coming soon.
All right. And I hope, I agree. I think that Miebach does a great job of supporting our clients in terms of being ready for these changes because there's so many changes that we cannot be ready for. None of us were ready for COVID when it hit, but these are changes that we can be ready for, and we can help our clients to prepare for this additional information share, this additional level of responsibility. And because we want our clients to be responsible, we want to be part of a responsible supply chain. So I think it's wonderful that we're doing this. But I also look forward to not only the EU regulations, but expanding this into other geographies. And even if it's not a regulation yet, maybe we can help other companies do that, because as the companies in the EU have to look down, as we were talking earlier, into those very intricate webs of their suppliers and producers, it's going to expand beyond the geography of Europe. It's going to expand into the US. It's going to expand into Africa and Asia. And all of these things are going to affect us at some point. So let's be prepared. Let's be proactive about it. And let's look at the benefits that we can get from it rather than just extra work.
Definitely. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I have loved our conversation, and I can't wait to talk again in a year or so, or whenever some of these things whenever some of these changes start to come into effect and actually see results from it. I think that'll be a really exciting time in supply chain.
Yeah, well, I'm very looking forward to it too. And thank you very much, Alan, for this conversation. That was a lot of fun.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode. I hope our listeners enjoyed the discussion as much as we did. If anyone out there has a suggestion for a topic or would like to be a guest on our show, we'd love to hear from you. Please reach out to me at podcast@miebach.com anytime. As always, thank you for listening to Speaking of Supply Chain. If you enjoyed our show, please rate and review us on whatever podcast platform you prefer, Apple, Google, or Spotify, and be sure to tune in next time.